Please be seated. The Board of Inquiry into the Hayfield Mine Fire is now in session. Please write. I remind you that you can see the morning number.
Ms. White, before lunch I was asking you some questions about the qualification in the 2009 rehabilitation plan concerning the necessary removal of infrastructure works. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Can I mention to you some evidence that Mr Faithful of GDF will give in the inquiry, and that is, in short terms, that broadly speaking, the steps involved in relation to rehabilitation of the batters of the mine include the following. First, stability assessments are required. Second, placing and then undertaking for the rehabilitation works. Third, the mining infrastructure situated in the vicinity of the batters that will need to be removed is identified, and depending on what the infrastructure is and what stage of the sequence has been reached, infrastructure which is required for the ongoing operation of the mine needs to be rebuilt in a different location. Mr Faithful goes on to describe another 3 stages in rehabilitation. Having regard to that evidence, what I would suggest to you is that the need to remove infrastructure which is in the vicinity of parts of the mine that need to be rehabilitated is in and of itself a necessary part of rehabilitation. Would you agree with that?
The removing of the infrastructure is part of rehabilitation. Post-mining is complete. All the infrastructure is to be removed from the site.
But what I would suggest is that it's part of progressive rehabilitation as well, meaning that when one part of the mine is ready for rehabilitation and is no longer being mined, infrastructure near to that part needs to be moved in order that that part can be rehabilitated. That's correct, isn't it?
No, I don't think I would agree entirely with your statement, though I see your logic. The mine has a range of infrastructure that needs to be in place for a number of years, regardless of whether even when the batters or the mining has been completed and it's no longer an operational part of the mine. And I think things such as the ponds that exist at the bottom of the area that has been worked out, the bores that have been constructed for groundwater control pumping, the horizontal bores that exist in the northern batter for stability are all ongoing requirements at the moment of the mine. It may not be the working face, they may not be coaling, but all that infrastructure is required.
Yes, but what Mr Faithful seems to be suggesting is that it may be necessary to move the infrastructure in order that rehabilitation can occur.
And that would be the case over time. It's a matter of whether that infrastructure can be moved in a way that still effectively enables groundwater control and stabilisation of the batter, as well as enabling rehabilitation.
Yes. So in relation to the comments at the document I took you to before lunch in the 2008 progress report on the rehabilitation plan, where it was said that the mine permanent northern perimeter batters have not been rehabilitated due to the large amount of infrastructure remaining which is still required. What assessment did the mine regulator do about the feasibility of that infrastructure being removed?
I don't believe that we did a feasibility analysis of that. The mine infrastructure as it exists now is still required. There are other areas of the mine that could be progressively rehabilitated while leaving that infrastructure intact and to do the job that it's doing. I wouldn't want to underestimate the extent of that infrastructure or the value it provides in keeping the mine stable, which is another key issue for us.
Yes, but you're saying that the mining regulator took for granted what was said there and did not itself assess whether that infrastructure could be moved somewhere else in the mine so that the mine perimeter, northern perimeter batters could be rehabilitated.
As I mentioned, the infrastructure that is within and adjacent to that northern batter is still an essential part of the working of the mine. I see your point about whether it could be moved. However, could I say that that's a very complex operation to consider whether, for example, the ponds and the groundwater bores could be moved and still undertake the task that's required of them to keep the mine stable. So I'm not trying to say that they couldn't be moved. I think given that the job that they are required to do is being done at the moment, and there is no requirement to move them yet because there are other areas that could be rehabilitated, I would accept that the infrastructure is in the right place.
But there was no consideration by the mine regulator about whether or not they could be moved at the time.
As I mentioned, given that it provides an essential function of the mine's operations, there was no requirement for us to consider an alternative place.
So is the consequence then that, having regard to that, the desirability of leaving that infrastructure in place is effectively traded off against the opportunity to rehabilitate that part of the mine at that time?
I don't know whether I would put it as a trade-off, but there is an opportunity to schedule the rehabilitation for the end of mine life works for later in the life of the mine.
But the necessary consequence of leaving mine infrastructure in place and not moving it is that that part of the mine adjacent to the mine infrastructure cannot be rehabilitated until that equipment is either moved or decommissioned.
That's correct, but I would also restate the significance of that mine infrastructure to ensuring that the mine can operate on its day-to-day operations.
Does the mining regulator accept that it has a role in that context for making its own determination about whether it is appropriate that mining infrastructure be removed?
If, as the mining regulator, we had an issue with the location of infrastructure or believed there was a better alternative, we would express that view.
At paragraph 108 of your statement, you indicate that the lack of availability of overburden is a constraint to rehabilitation. Do you recall that?
Yes, that is at paragraph 108.
And you say as a result of that to manage this constraint, the plan has identified 4 stages for replacement of overburden, and we discussed the 4 stages with Ms Richards this morning. What investigations has the mining regulator done about whether in fact material to cover overbatters and to be used in rehabilitation could be proactively sourced from other parts of the mine rather than simply using material that is a byproduct of mining operations?
The current plan that's approved accepts that the overburden from coal winning activities would be used to rehabilitate the mine.
Yes, that is clear, but has the mining regulator investigated doing it differently by taking material that can be used for rehabilitation from parts of the mine that aren't actually being mined?
We have done some, since the fire, we've had some initial conversations internally about what are the opportunities to be able to use other options for overburden. They have included whether it would be feasible to take the material that's currently rehabilitated in the east and western overburden dumps outside the mine. We've had conversations. We haven't reached a conclusion. We've also looked to see and can confirm that the overburden that's currently being removed does not have the characteristics that would be required to go on batters. Yes.
Yes, and those sorts of conversations, if I can put it that way, were not something that the mining regulator did before the Hazelwood fire.
No, that's correct.
Yes. Mr Faithfull says in his statement that so far 431 hectares of the mine have been rehabilitated. You agreed this morning that about 3,000 hectares were unrehabilitated. On my maths, that gives us about 14% of the area of the mine that could be rehabilitated, and that has occurred in the years 1996 to 2014, which is, give or take, 18 years. That leaves the years 2014 to 2032, is it?
That's the end of the mine
Yes.
life proposed. Yes.
So why is it that DSDBI considers that 14% is an adequate remediation percentage to date?
I think it's about understanding what's happened in time. At the time of privatisation in 1996, there was little rehabilitation planned, given the idea that the void would flood. From 1996 to 2009, the expansion of the mine happened, which also enabled and allowed for further reflection or further consideration of what would be an appropriate rehabilitation plan. And so since that time, we have then developed a different rehabilitation plan that incorporates covering, or if you like, laying back batters, then covering them with material right down to what would be the 6-year water level, which is, if you like, what comes up to what the water level is after 6 years of no pumping.
Yes. But we come back to a figure of 86% of 3,000 hectares, and an even greater percentage of about 5,000 hectares, which is about the total area of the mine, that remains to be rehabilitated, with less than half of the mine's life to go. I would suggest to you that the the rehabilitation plan to date does not provide sufficient specificity to allow the mining regulator to determine that that amount of rehabilitation can be done within the time.
I don't have any reason to doubt that GDF Sewers can do the rehabilitation. It's what they themselves have proposed, it's what they've agreed to do, and we've approved that. I understand that the mine is large and that for many years there was very little rehabilitation, particularly of the batters, but since 2009 there has been a changed arrangement for rehabilitation.
But all you really have to go on is the fact that GDF has agreed to do it and has agreed to do it in some years hence.
It's underway now.
Yes.
Yes.
But what analysis has your office taken to reassure itself that GDF will have the capability, the resources and the willingness to get the remainder, the very large proportion of the remainder of the rehabilitation done by the time at which the mine closes?
To use current practice as an example, we would we do review the rehabilitation plan along with other aspects of the work plan on a regular basis. So we would be monitoring, or we do monitor the rehabilitation progress, and we do seek from GDF Sewers agreement that they will follow the rehabilitation plan as it's defined.
Yes. And when you say GDF is compliant, what you mean is that it's not, or that needs to be understood rather in the context that it's not required really to do anything further on rehabilitation until 2019. That's right, isn't it?
The Block 1C rehabilitation is required to be completed by 2019 according to the work plan.
Yes, and that's the only obligation on it for rehabilitation under the work plan, isn't that right?
That's correct.
And so saying that it is compliant does not allow either your office or this inquiry to make any conclusions about the capacity or willingness that GDF has to complete the very large amount of remaining rehabilitation work by the time of the mine's end.
I can only point to the fact that GDF Sewers are a large mining operation who can bring all the resources of such an organisation to such efforts as you've described, and I have no reason to doubt that they can meet the requirements of the rehabilitation plan.
So who determines under the rehabilitation plan when various parts of the mine will be rehabilitated?
GDF Sewers produced the rehabilitation plan. There's opportunities, and there were opportunities of discussion about that with Mine Inspectorate around what their approach would be. The discussions that if you like, proceeded before the work plan talked about changing the rehabilitation plan from a full flood or mine void flooding operation to the one that is currently included in the work plan.
So you've mentioned on a few occasions discussions. Just to be clear, what do you understand the role of your office to be in approving the rehabilitation plan?
We approve it.
Yes. Well, does that mean that you take responsibility for the content of it?
As I mentioned, the mine operator has the duty to produce that, and we have the responsibility of providing the regulatory oversight.
Okay. But you don't determine when it is that progressive rehabilitation will occur under the rubric of that plan?
I think largely GDF Sewers can produce a rehabilitation plan according to the requirements to have it progressive and to be complete at end of mine life. We would have an input if we considered that there was something that was outstanding that should have been considered and wasn't. It's largely their plan.
But it's a very important regulatory document, isn't it?
The work plan is, yes, it's the key regulatory document for the regulation of the Minerals Resources Sustainable Development Act.
Can I ask you some questions about the bond? And I'll just try and ask you some things that Ms Richards hasn't asked. One of the purposes of the bond is to provide an incentive to the mine operator to finish the rehabilitation within the life of the mine, isn't it?
That's correct.
And would you agree that where a bond is grossly inadequate, that does not provide a good incentive to the mine operator to complete the work within the time finished?
As I mentioned earlier, the rehabilitation bond is one aspect that, if you like, acts as a means of providing a surety for rehabilitation. The other aspects that need to be considered in this, along with the rehabilitation bond, are the requirement of the operator to complete rehabilitation during the time, regardless of the bond being held, and also that there are, if needed, there are powers in the legislation to require additional rehabilitation to the bond, and that the licence holder can be made to pay for those.
But that hasn't been exercised in this case, has it?
No, there has been no requirement.
And can I just ask you very briefly about some documents you've attached to your second statement concerning the bond? Can I ask you about the the briefing paper from the department to the acting executive director from the manager of Minerals and Petroleum Operations dated the 4th of December 1995?
I've got
you
that,
have
yes.
that document.
Yes.
You'll see there that at paragraph number 8, it said that bonds are usually based on an estimate of worst-case liability during the life of the mine. To set a bond for this site based only on end-of-life costs would be a departure from this practice. However, the importance of the mine as part of the state's power infrastructure means it's very unlikely to close before the scheduled end of life. It can therefore be argued that provided progressive rehabilitation is kept up, potential liability to the state is only at the cost of closure. Would you agree that, that the entire rationale for departing from the usual practice in the case of this bond for this mine is that progressive rehabilitation be kept up?
I can only interpret the meaning as it's written here, and that they've provided a number of rationales, if you like, or a rationale as to why the bond should be at the level it is.
Yes, but in terms of limiting it to the end costs, that was predicated on the need for progressive rehabilitation to be kept up.
That's the way that that document is written, yes.
I accept, Ms White, that you're not the author of the document. And so that would be one factor in determining the adequacy of this bond, looking at the extent to which progressive rehabilitation has occurred during the life of the mine.
That's the way that I would interpret that, yes.
Yes. Do you know whether the rehabilitation bond was assessed in, or rather has been indexed at all? Because I suggest it appears not to be.
That's my understanding, it has not.
Yes. All right. And under section 79A of the Act, no doubt you're aware that the Minister may require an authority holder to undertake an assessment of the authority holder's rehabilitation liability under Section 78 or 78A for the purposes of determining the amount of a rehabilitation bond or reviewing the amount of a rehabilitation bond entered into or to be entered into. Are you aware of that? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes. And has that requirement ever been used in this case?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Can I just return very briefly to the briefing document? And I appreciate you're not the author of this document, but I, on the basis that you've done some research into the archives, I'll ask you this question. Under the heading recommendation, it is said that, at paragraph 9, we recommend that we maintain the present nominated bond of $15 million to cover the end-of-life costs. 10, we agree not to seek further bond against the current liability for works which are carried out on a progressive basis during the life of the mine. Do you know whether the Department or the Minister agreed with GDF Sewers not to seek a further bond?
I'm not aware that there was any correspondence to that effect with GDF Sewers or its previous company.
So, sorry, to be clear, are you saying you just don't know the answer to the question, or you believe no agreement was made, or...?
I'm not aware of any such agreement. I could be. No, I'm not aware of an agreement like that.
So you don't really know the answer to the question?
I don't believe it exists, only because in our research this is what we've discovered.
Are you aware that in 1993 the Auditor General produced a report into open cut production in the Latrobe Valley?
No, I'm not aware of that.
All right. With the board's leave, can I provide a copy of that document to Ms. White and to the board?
Sorry, what do you have in mind?
It is document entitled Victorian Auditor General's Office, Special Report number 24, Open Cut Production in the Latrobe Valley. It refers to some rehabilitation costs. If you will receive it, I would like to provide a copy to you and to Ms. White.
I'm not sure of. Is there any other way? It's just that because it comes in no particular way, I just don't know how it's going to be linked in with other material.
I'm not sure of the utility of asking this witness about a 1993 document that she
has
said she doesn't know about.
I can deal with it another way.
Yes, well, it can be done, but I think between the witnesses, she doesn't.
All right. So I'll just tell you briefly. In that report, the Auditor General reported that in the context of the SECV being responsible for mines in the Latrobe Valley, that it was estimated by the Latrobe Regional Commission that total cost for funding land rehabilitation at open costs alone would be in the vicinity of $125 million. And it was said that this estimate is comparable with New South Wales rehabilitation costs, where security deposits of up to $32,000 per hectare are required to cover the full costs of rehabilitation. Do you know whether that report was ever considered by your predecessors?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay, all right, thank you. Can I just finish by asking you some questions about the regulatory paradigm that are addressed towards the end of your first statement? At paragraph 180, you say the existing statutory framework is not the best tool to require work plans and or rehabilitation plans to address fire risk. Statutory framework takes a prescriptive approach to the content of work plans and rehabilitation plans. You go on to illustrate that proposition by reference to Schedule 15 of the regulations. Do you have Schedule 15 there? It's at KAW5.
I do.
If you look at that document for a moment, it's headed Part 1, Information Required in a Work Plan for a Mining Licence.
Yes.
And you go over to section 6. It requires a rehabilitation plan that addresses concepts for end utilisation, includes a proposal for progressive rehabilitation, and includes proposals for the end rehabilitation of the site, including final security and removal of plant and equipment. I'd like to suggest to you, Ms White, that nothing in that schedule precludes the mining regulator from taking into account the risk of fire within the mine that might arise from decisions made in the course of regulating rehabilitation.
It defines what a rehabilitation is under the MRSDA Act, as you've described, but there are other requirements that are around identifying fire and the risk of fire in other legislation.
Yes. But so do you read this schedule as restricting what may be in a rehabilitation plan?
It does. It specifies what should be in a rehabilitation plan to enable an end use to be determined.
So you read that schedule as excluding any consideration that's not mentioned in that?
That's correct.
Can I ask you, at paragraph 182 of your statement, you mentioned that a better system would require mining operators to identify risks and formulate the manner in which they would be addressed, and then the regulator would act as an auditor and advisor. Do you see that role as described there as being a more passive or a more active role than the regulator is currently taking?
I don't think I would describe either as or one or the other as more active or more passive. They're different models to have as a regulatory framework. The current one is prescriptive and so could be seen to define through a list what needs to be considered. The second model relates to identification of risks and then apply the mitigation response to them. So that they're two models. A prescriptive model can sometimes be seen as, if you like, provides a definitive list and does preclude other considerations. A risk-based model is a broader model and within the legislation could if you like, have a broader range of considerations or identification of risk.
At 189 of your statement, you say that if the board were to consider that mitigation of fire risk ought to be addressed in part or whole in a work plan or rehabilitation plan, a range of matters would need to be considered. You're not suggesting there, are you, that those matters haven't already been considered by the department?
No, I'm actually saying that there is a range of matters there that we've identified, and it may not be complete or comprehensive, but it's a range of matters that we believe need to be considered in light of whether we take a different approach to rehabilitation that would include fire prevention.
And there are a number of factors there about which quite a bit is already known, aren't there? For example, whether exposed coal batters ought to be covered or wetted with sprays. There's a lot known about the implications of doing those things, isn't there?
I think it's just about saying that there's probably a range of options that could be considered in order to come up with the best possible rehabilitation plan to best meet a broader suite of objectives, including fire.
Yes, and can I ask you about G? You mentioned the cost of works. Surely any cost ought also to be considered in the context of the cost or the potential cost of a serious outbreak of fire from the mine. Would you agree with that?
Given that fire is something that needs to be addressed in existing legislation, I would think that the cost of such work that would be intended to minimise fire risk is a consideration already. It's a note here that the cost of such work, particularly around not only additional infrastructure, but we also know the considerations that would be needed to do earthworks as well as maintain stability could be a very large sum. It could be a very expensive works.
Right. And you said paragraph 190, the licensee is in a better position than me or DSDBI to identify matters before deciding whether and how to prepare a proposal to accelerate or modify rehabilitation of exposed coal faces at the Hazelwood mine. Surely the mine regulator has a role in deciding whether or how to prepare a proposal to accelerate or modify rehabilitation of coal faces. Would you agree with that?
I would say that the regulator does have a role in the oversight of this. This point goes to the issues that the mine operator is in the best place to identify the risks and the range of ways of being able to mitigate them. We had a discussion before about a prescriptive approach. A prescriptive approach from a regulator then defines the exact way in which things are to be done. There is perhaps some benefit in considering alternative ways of being able to mitigate against risk, including fire in this case, and that GDF Sewers, who know their mine well, and also the capacity that they have or capability they can bring to work such as rehabilitation, are in the best position.
But ultimately it's the mine regulator's job to consider and decide whether or not those risks have been properly and sufficiently identified.
To be satisfied, yes.
Yes, right. Thank you, Ms White. I have nothing further.
Ms White, my name is Rachel Doyle. I'm here for GDF Sewers. Early on in your evidence, you were taken to an attachment to Mr Lapsley's statement. It's mentioned in paragraph 210 of his statement. It was put up on the screen for you, the Gippsland Strategic Fire Management Plan 2013. I'm hoping we can return to that briefly. I took it from your evidence, Ms White, that you said that neither you nor your mine regulation part of the department had been consulted in the development of this Strategic Fire Management Plan.
We haven't been a part to that, to my knowledge.
Mm-hmm. In the early couple of pages of the document, it seems to be authored, or at least to have been overseen by Mr Mark Potter, who I think is styled as a manager of the Regional Strategic Fire Planning Committee. And you can see there, it's up on the screen, the page where that's suggested. To what department within government does this Management Planning Committee report? Where is it housed?
I'm sorry, I can't tell you that. I don't know.
Have you seen Mr Pullman's statement? He's representative of Latrobe City Council. Have you had the opportunity to read his statement?
I've only been made aware of some of the content. I haven't read it.
At paragraphs 48 to 49 of his statement, he says the council haven't been consulted about this document that's up on the screen. I don't know whether you're aware of that or not.
No, I wasn't aware of that.
Your department as the mine regulator hasn't been consulted?
Not that I'm aware.
And our inquiries so far indicate that GDF Sewers hasn't been consulted. Do you know who has played a role in it?
If I could just object to this cross-examination, the document identified at 48 and 49 is an entirely different plan in Mr Pullman's statement. It's the coal strategic plan, not the regional fire management plan.
All right, I'll take that on notice. But you haven't played a role in this document and you don't know who has played a role in its development?
I am not aware that we were involved in the production of this document, and I have that from my regional inspectorate team.
All right. Now, this afternoon you were asked some questions about the requirements for progressive rehabilitation. Just before lunch you were asked about, by Ms Nichols, about Section 81 under the Act. And it was suggested to you that that provision requires a mine operator to achieve progressive rehabilitation at the earliest practicable opportunity after the land is no longer required for operations. You recall you had a discussion about that. I want to ask you, though, about where that requirement finds life. If we go to the licence itself, I think that's attachment 3 to your statement. Perhaps if that can be brought up. To your first statement, I should say. Can I ask you to look at clause 15.1? That's the part of one of the conditions in the mining licence which is titled Progressive Rehabilitation. And can you see in 15.1, it says that it will be conducted as per the rehabilitation plan. Now, I take it that's a reference to the work plan as varied or as in place from time to time.
Yes.
Without going to the work plan, let me know if you need to, but I wanted to ask you some general propositions about where we would find notions of practicability in the work plan. I take it from looking at the work plan, many factors are weighed when considering what aspects of rehabilitation progressively are practicable. Would you agree with that?
I think there are many considerations, yes.
One of them is, what is the plan at the end of the life of the mine? So what are we aiming for?
That's right.
One of them is, what are the planned works or the coal winning activities within the mine, and in what sequence will they be undertaken?
That's right.
One of them is this question of infrastructure that you've been asked questions about. Within the work plan, there's a reference to infrastructure for the mine, but also community infrastructure. Would you understand community infrastructure to include, by way of specific example, some infrastructure that's above the northern batters to this mine, namely a freeway and power lines?
Yes, and there's a drain as well.
All right. It seems also from looking at the work plan that questions of feasibility are also given consideration when one looks at what will be practicable progressive rehabilitation.
There are those considerations. They're not specified directly in the legislation, but you actually do need to be able to rehabilitate it effectively.
And I take it from some of the answers you've given today that there's a question under the rubric of feasibility of the suitability of the overburden material for placing it on batters.
Suitability of material, yes.
And there's also, I take it, the question of the slope at which the batters are when the material is placed on them. In other words, a sharp incline might be safe or unsafe depending on the design of the mine and the type of material placed on it.
That's right. You generally have a lower sloping batter.
And is it the case that one of the considerations that you as the mine regulator look at is whether or not any end-of-life rehabilitation, as well as progressive rehabilitation, will impact negatively on the stability of the mine in terms of the slope of the batter and the suitability of the material placed on it?
Yes, that's correct. We look at stability both during the time of the mine is operating and in the works proposed for rehabilitation.
Now, during the morning, Ms Petering asked you whose responsibility it was to monitor compliance with the rehabilitation program under the current plan. And you said that Ms Anne Bignell within your department has the direct responsibility for this mine, if I understood you correctly.
That's right. She's the inspector based here in Gippsland.
And I take it then that would be part of her responsibility to monitor compliance with the plan generally, but also with respect to any milestones with respect to progressive rehabilitation.
Yes, that would be my understanding of her role.
And I think you said that your understanding is she's visited this mine about 12 times a year or roughly once a month.
About that many times, yes. I can't be categorically any more specific, but about that many times.
And you would expect if she detected any failure in complying with progressive rehabilitation plans that she would speak to the mine owner first, but if necessary, report that back up the chain to you within the department.
I would expect that would be the case if there was a milestone that had been met or a milestone that had been reached but the expectations hadn't been met.
And is it the case, Ms White, that in the development of the progressive rehabilitation plan that's housed within the work plan, that the department also has the opportunity to contribute to progressive drafts of that document and make suggestions as it's in development?
We can be provided with drafts, or there can be discussions or meetings about the effectiveness of what's proposed, yes.
And following the submission of the 2009 work plan for approval by the department, it's not the case, is it, that either Ms Bignell or any other officer from your department has said that the plan needs to be, first of all, changed in order to speed up or change the progressive rehabilitation targets?
There hasn't been that meeting or correspondence, no.
And nor has there been an occasion where Ms Bignell has suggested that targets within the plan are not being met?
I have no reason to believe that's happened. I'm not aware of it.
This afternoon it was suggested to you as a basis for elucidating some percentages of rehabilitated parts of the mine compared with unrehabilitated parts, that there are some 3,000 hectares of unrehabilitated zones or areas within the mine. just want to go back to that for a moment, if I might, Ms White. The total area covered by the mining licence is approximately 3,000 hectares. Do you understand that to be the case?
I understand that's roughly approximately right, yes.
But that's not a good descriptor of the amount of unrehabilitated area within the mine. The unrehabilitated area within the mine is that which is disturbed by coal winning activities or is planned to be disturbed by coal winning activities.
Or other activities that may be undertaken on the site, whether it be road construction or something else.
And presently it's anticipated that the total area disturbed by either the coal winning activities or the subsidiary activities you've just described at end of life of mine will have been, throughout the life of the mine, more like 1,500 hectares.
I can't estimate that. I was working on a figure of that was put to me by the Environment Victoria.
So that wasn't based on your own research about
No.
that? Okay. Now, during this morning you were taken by Councillor Assisting to the previous work plan, the 1996 work plan, and there is one aspect of that I wanted to ask you about. That's also found at attachment 3 to your statement, and I want to take you to page 63 of that document. So it sits in behind the licence.
Which page?
Sorry, page 63 of the old work plan, the 1996 work plan, which sits in that attachment behind the licence itself, behind the Gazette. I'm using the numbers at the top right hand, but in terms of the document code, it ends with 0396.
Are you referring to the page that starts with 7.4?
That's right, bushfire mitigation
Yep.
program. The code that starts with DSDBI is .0007 0001 0396. That's the one. You were taken to this morning and you were asked some questions about paragraph 7.7.
Yes.
And it says there that HPC adheres to the Latrobe Valley policy. I'll just call that the 1994 policy for now. And then your attention was directed to the reference to, at the bottom of that page, a network of water reticulation sprays that has been established. And you recall you're also taken to a difficult-to-read map that's said to depict that. Now, as I read clause 7.7, Ms White, that is stating, is it not, that the touchstone here is compliance with the 1994 code or policy as varied from time to time or in place from time to time.
It makes reference to two parts. It makes reference to the policy as well as then a second part relating to water reticulation.
Well, I'd suggest to you that what it says is there is an extensive network as per the attached map, but that what it imposes as a requirement is compliance with the standards housed in the 1994 code.
I would agree with that.
And that if it be the case that there is a change to the water reticulation network, so long as the standards in the 1994 code are met, that would constitute compliance with the requirements in 7.7. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Now, you're also asked some questions, I'm now moving back to the current work plan, some other questions about the 2009 plan, and you were taken to some coloured maps and to parts of that plan, and some aspects of Mr Faithfull's evidence, anticipated evidence, were put to you. There's a matter I need to explore with you in relation to that. When you were taken to the map that's titled Figure 6.1 on page 6.6 in that 2009 work plan, if you recall, this is the one with some of the red blocking and the 1C.
Yep.
When you were asked about that, you suggested that this encapsulates a requirement that those red areas be rehabilitated by 2019.
Yes.
Mr Faithfull's evidence is different to that. His evidence is that when read as a whole, this work plan makes it clear that those rehabilitation works marked in red commence at 2019.
I don't agree with Mr Faithfull's interpretation.
I understand that, and in fairness, I need to show you some of the aspects of the plan that inform his different reading. Can I take you back to page 6.3 in the same document? where there's a clause headed 6.5, progressive rehabilitation, staging and sequencing. Sorry, yes, it's 6-5 as it appears. Sorry, page 6-3 appears at the bottom of the page that I want to direct your attention to. And there's a clause titled 6.5, progressive rehabilitation, staging / sequencing. That's it. You see there that it talks about the use of overburden materials being determined by taking into account the nature of the material. Now, during your evidence this morning, you've emphasised a number of times that the nature of the material is significant and that if the material doesn't bear the right qualities, it can be unsuitable for being used to cap batters. You agree with that?
That's right, yes.
You see in this section here, having mentioned that, there's then a reference to 2 major tasks to be completed using overburden, and then you've been taken to aspects of the next 2 points, 1 and 2. I want to direct your attention to the next paragraph where it says, overburden from mining blocks 1A, B and C comprises significant volumes of fine-grained sands from the former Morwell River. These sands are saturated and are most suited for placement on the floor of the mine. Could be used for batter coverage, however needs time to allow dissipation of water, which would otherwise build to unacceptable pressures. Given that the mine's high production needs do not allow sufficient time for dissipation, the material is considered unsuitable for batter coverage under this plan. And then it goes on, overburden from 1A, B and C is planned to be placed on the floor of the pit. Now, pausing there, can I suggest to you that a reading that's open on the face of this document when one reads the coloured maps with this section is that all overburden from 1A, B and C, by dint of its unsuitable nature, is to be placed in the floor of the mine and not to be used to cap exposed batters.
The way it's written there, though, does not relate to the map which indicates that rehabilitation would be completed because it's actually dated 2015 to 2019.
But the difficulty is, if you go to the bottom of the page we're looking at, a series of conceptual stage plans are provided as follows. Stage 1, figure 6.1, shows mining at the end of block 1C. And when one looks at Mr Faithfull's statement, that is the touchstone to which he refers, isn't it? End of mining at 2019 and then commence rehabilitation. Can you see that that reading is open?
I can see that that would be the interpretation, but it's not the interpretation that myself or my inspectorate have.
Mm-hmm. In light of that, though, given that that paragraph says that all the overburden available from 1A, B and C is going in the floor of the mine, where does the plan say one gets the overburden for coverage of the red bits, if I can put it that way, in the map we were looking at?
I would leave that to GDF Sewers to determine where they would source the material.
Acknowledging, as you do, that sourcing material with the right characteristics is essential to ensure mine stability.
That's right, and GDF Sewers are aware of that too.
And we spoke earlier about Ms Bignell. I assume you don't expect that she'll wait till 2019 and then indicate whether there's been any shortcoming in adherence to this plan. You'd assume it's something she's been looking at thus far.
That's right.
Have you had an opportunity to look at the statement of Mr Incol, who is proposed to give expert evidence in these proceedings?
I have looked at his statement, not in depth.
I just
You'll
want
need
to
point me.
only ask you about
Yep.
one thing, and there's no need to go to it because it really generates a general question. At paragraph 281 of his statement, he gives a suggestion for some temporary rehabilitation. And one of the elements seems to be a suggestion that what could be done is, rather than going to the end-of-life model of rehabilitation, where one lays back batters and then puts overburden on them, that one might put some overburden on some batters now before they're laid back. Do you understand the concept without having necessarily gone into the detail of his statement?
I think I understand what he might have said.
Yeah. Would you agree that that poses a number of complex questions of feasibility because of the steep slope that one would then be placing overburden on if one hasn't laid the batters back?
I think there's a couple of matters there. One is around the steep slope, but in part it's also about whether it could exacerbate the stability of those batters without reforming them.
Yes.
And particularly if we're talking about the northern batters, which have already got a known stability question over them and being monitored on a daily basis, the concern would be whether that approach would deal with the other risks that the mine has.
And I take it then that you would suggest that those criteria you've got listed in paragraph 189 of your statement would be a good model to check the INCOL proposal against. That those are the kinds of things you should check it against.
That's a list that we determined, or that I determined would be a list that we should consider. I'm not sure of Mr. Incol's, if you like, his assumptions, but I still think our list would be a good starting point.
Final couple of matters I want to ask you about. I know you said you haven't gone into the detail of Mr. Pullman's statement, but very early on in his statement he indicates that 3 plantations have been permitted to be established within a kilometre of the mine, and he makes the point that the council doesn't have any particular capacity to deal with that because no planning permit's required. Can I ask you about your role as mine regulator in that regard? Looking at your statement, the terms of the Act, the licence and the work plans, I can't see anywhere in there any power on the part of your department to direct anyone other than the owner of the mine to reduce risks to the mine. And what I'm coming to is this. I take it that you don't have any power to engage with plantation owners about the risk they pose to mines as opposed to vice versa.
I don't have powers of other landholders, such as plantation owners.
Finally, I want to ask you about the bond materials that are attached to your supplementary statement. Can you just go back, first of all, to that document that you've been taken to a couple of times, the memorandum from 1995, dated 4 December 1995. Again, with all of the caveats, you didn't write it and you've essentially sourced it from archives. Is it your understanding that this is a communication from the then owner or operator of the mine, which was Generation Victoria, during the period between being wholly state-owned and moving to privatisation? In other words, it's pre-sale. It's pre-sale to GDF Suez' predecessors.
Yes, it's dated 1995.
And as the sale is afterwards, we can assume that this information comes from those at Generation Victoria who were charged with the responsibility of running the mine. The estimates that it's built on, it comes from them.
I can only assume that would be the case as you have, based on the information there.
And a reasonable assumption would also be that when the authors of these documents are talking about end of life of mine, they're of course talking from a 1995 mindset, which is with respect to a smaller mine with different qualities and a different sequence of work predicted at that stage.
At that time, the mine was not anticipated to be the size as it is today.
It's been suggested to you a couple of times today that the bond ought to represent, at least in part, the possible costs of rehabilitation. I took it from a couple of the answers you gave that you might also agree that it is also intended to guard against what the risk is assessed to be of the entity not fulfilling its responsibilities with respect to its work plans and its mining licence.
It is, the rehabilitation bond is expected to quantify the risks that would need to be rehabilitated if it was not done so by the operator.
And thus far, I think you said a moment ago in answer to one of the last questions you were asked, thus far you have no basis on which or no reason for which to consider that the current obligations of GDF Suez wouldn't be met pursuant to the plan.
I have no reason to disagree with that. And just along the lines of is that rehabilitation is required as part of the work plan.
I have no further questions for Ms White.
One question only, if I may. Ms White, before lunch you said that if you relied on rainwater alone, it could take up to 500 years to fill the void. You recall giving evidence along those lines?
It was, that statement has been included in previous documents, yes, relating to this mine.
We've heard several dates for rehabilitation, but assuming you don't rely wholly on rainwater to fill the void, in what year, according to the current plan, will rehabilitation of the mine be completed?
2032 is the estimated mine life, and completion of the mining as it exists in the current footprint. Post that time, there would then be the removal of infrastructure and all other requirements, and then we would move to the rehabilitation plan envisages that the 6-year refill level, so that would be the level of the mine after letting 6 years of natural water recharge into that mine be the, if you like, the base of the water, or that'd be the extent of the water, and rehabilitation of the batters would come down to that level.
Thank you.
Just a couple more questions in re-examination arising out of some questions that Ms Doyle for GDF Sewers asked you. It was put to you, Ms White, that, and it may help to have the document in front of you, it's attachment 3 to your statement. Which is the original gazettal, and if you just stay on that page, if we go to page 63 of that document, where fire protection policy is dealt with, and Ms Doyle put to you that what mattered for the purpose of this document was compliance with the Mine Fire Service Policy and Code of Practice, and that it would be possible to change the water reticulation system as long as it was compliant with the Code of Practice. And you agreed with that proposition?
That would be my understanding.
Now, what is the process for determining whether a change to the water reticulation system complies with the Code of Practice? Is that just a matter that's left to the mine operator to determine for itself?
Given that I haven't done this, I would envisage that the approach would be that GDF Sewers would specify to the regulator that they are compliant with the code because of these reasons, and that they would be assessed and considered as adequate.
And the regulator up to the 31st of December 2007 was DPI,
That's
the mine
right.
regulator, and
Yes.
from the 1st of January 2008 it's been the Victorian Work Cover Authority. It would be reasonable to expect, would it not, that if there was a proposal to remove pipes in the water reticulation system that's annexed to this work plan, that there would at a minimum be a risk assessment done?
I would envisage that a risk assessment, or possibly something that would say, is there an alternative that is contained within the fire code that would mean that the mine is still compliant with the fire code
Yes.
policy.
Now, Ms Doyle also put to you that rehabilitation in relation to mining Block 1C should commence at the end of that block in 2019 because the overburden from that block is unsuitable for rehabilitation purposes. And you, as I understood your evidence, did not agree with that interpretation of the rehabilitation plan. Can I draw your attention to, this is in attachment 12 to your statement, the 2009 work plan variation. Can I draw your attention to table 5.1 on page, should be the 24th page of the document. The page number is 5-2 on the bottom. So I think it's the 24th page. Or thereabouts. Yes. Table 5.1 is the one I want to direct your attention to. And that sets out the mining schedule, does it not? And there are separate schedules for overburden and coal.
Yes, that's right.
And we can see in that schedule that overburden is removed for Phase 2A between 2016 and 2017. So that overburden would presumably be available for rehabilitation works in 2018 and 2019.
I would say that would be available.
And similarly, the overburden removal in Phase 2B commences in 2018. So that overburden would be available for use from that date.
That would be my assumption as well.
Which tends to support your interpretation of the scheduling.
I'd like to think so.
Yes. Thank you. I have no further questions from Ms White. May she be excused?
Thank you.
while some folders are being reorganised, I can indicate the next witness will be the community witness for today, Mr. Robert Galton. And I think we're, ready for Mr. Galton, please, to come to the witness box.
Please state your full name.
Robert John Galton.
Please raise the Bible and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
to this Board of Inquiry
to this Board of Inquiry
will be the truth,
will be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Afternoon, Mr. Galton.
Good afternoon.
Could you please repeat for the transcript your full name?
Robert John Galton.
And can you tell us your address, please, sir? Mr. Galton, you have lived in the Valley for some 42 years.
Correct.
And you, whilst living in the Valley, have spent many years working in and around all three of the open coal mines.
23 to 24 of those years.
All right. And for the purposes of the inquiry, you have made a witness statement, is that right?
Correct.
And there are two attachments to the statement, which I'll ask you about presently. Is the statement 47 paragraphs long? Do you have I think you've got a copy in front of you.
I do, and my recall is that it's 47 paragraphs long.
Terrific. And have you had an opportunity to read through the statement before coming along this afternoon?
I have.
Anything you want to change in the statement?
No.
And its contents are true and correct, I take it?
In as far as I understand, correct.
All right, I'll tend to the statement. Now, Mr. Galton, you're a geologist by training.
Correct.
Your qualifications are set out in paragraph 2 of your statement and extend from a diploma in applied geology from the Bendigo Institute of Technology through to more recently a PhD from Monash University.
That is correct.
Prefer Dr. Galton or Mr. Galton?
I respond to either.
All right. Your thesis topic is, as described in paragraph 2, managing and leading cultural change in the Australian minerals industry. When were you awarded the PhD?
I think it would be 2002.
All right. Now, you already told us that you worked in the Valley, and you spent, according to paragraph 3 of your statement, 24 years working for the SECV in each of the mines as a geologist. Initially, you were the only geologist employed by the Commission, the former Commission.
I was indeed.
But ultimately, by the time you finished, you were a member of a team, and part of your responsibilities included training other members of that team. Is that correct?
That's correct. Training and supervising other members of the Earth Sciences teams.
Since taking a package from the SECV, you have firstly completed your PhD studies and secondly spent some time doing some consulting work for each of the 3 open cut coal mines in the Valley. Is that right?
That is correct. I have undertaken consulting work at each of the 3 open cut mines, not necessarily as a client in a direct sense, but in some cases, yes, but as an employee of other consultancies.
Now, at paragraph 8 of your statement, no doubt drawing on your extensive experience working as a geologist in the various brown coal mines, you set out in considerable detail the geological explanation for why brown coal, A, is so flammable when it dries out, and B, why it's so difficult to put brown coal fires out?
Yes.
Right. The inquiry will also have the benefit of hearing evidence from Professor Cliff later in the week on a similar topic. But I was drawn to what you say at paragraph 12 about the extent to which brown coal, as it exists in the Latrobe Valley, dries out, that it goes from some 2/3 moisture content down to 20% or a fifth. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Can you just, for our purposes, give an understandable to the layperson explanation for those particular characteristics that you identify of brown coal? What makes it so flammable and why it's so hard to put brown coal fires out once they start?
Allow me to premise my statement by indicating quite clearly that I am not an expert on the combustion of brown coal. However, I do have some understanding of the nature and structure of brown coal. First of all, the porosity of brown coal, which is a measure basically derived by taking the difference between the size of a given quantity of brown coal as determined by immersion in mercury, and then dividing it by the penetration by helium, gives a porosity of brown coal typically in the range of about 40%. That porosity changes as the brown coal desiccates. That will reduce to about 20%. So brown coal, if you like, is analogous to a sponge. In fact, most coals are, but some are far more porous than others. Brown coal represents a higher level porosity. Brown coal is not much more advanced really than peat or lignite. It has been estimated by the HRL scientists in the old State Electricity Commission of Victoria that in moist brown coal, with its intrinsic porosity of 40%, that the total surface area of the coal, the individual macerals which make up the coal, is of the order of 300 square metres per gram of coal for Victorian brown coals. My mental arithmetic indicates that if we were to take a 3 kilogram sample of brown coal, which might be about the size of a football, yes, the total surface area equates to around 1 million square metres. That area is available for combustion. My understanding further is that the porosity of black coal is typically 5% or less. It may be 1/4 to 1/10 of the porosity of brown coal, with a corresponding decrease in the amount of surface area available to penetration by oxygen and therefore combustion. My feeling is that this is one of the key reasons why brown coal is difficult to extinguish. External water supplied to burning brown coal will certainly douse combustion on the outside of the coal. It will not necessarily have the same effect in the micropores of the coal, which could also be combusting. That's why I believe in order to successfully attack brown coal fires with water requires consistent supplies of water, so that, if you like, the whole area is drowned rather than just cooled. It also, as far as I understand, acts to be a generator of carbon monoxide. If we apply water to burning brown coal, the propensity is there to generate larger quantities of carbon monoxide than one might expect with a black coal fire or coals of higher rank than brown coal. In addition to that, and I've been talking about the microstructure of brown coal here, if you like, the macrostructure, because of the shrinkage, means that brown coal at the surface when it's dried has shrunk, and that facilitates the propagation of extensive shrinkage cracking, which in collaboration with the jointed nature of brown coal, if we like cracks that run through the coal which have been induced by geological forces in the past, makes available extra passages for oxygen ingress. So we have the micropore structure and combustion occurring at that level, and we also have a desiccated coal surface which is widely permeable to the ingress of oxygen, which will support combustion.
Thanks very much, Mr. Galton. The difficulties you've described and for suppressing brown coal fires and the geological explanation for that are why we see in the literature and the evidence the inquiry's heard references the importance of preventing brown coal fires in the first place rather than trying to put them out once they start. I assume you'd endorse that general approach.
Most emphatically.
Yes, it's something you deal with later in your statement, and I'll come to that presently. Now, sticking with the order in which you deal with matters in your statement, sorry, there's one matter that I meant to ask you about. You referred to brown coal and lignite. I think up until now in this inquiry the terms have been used synonymously. I take it from what you've just said that there is a difference between the two?
There is, depending on which classification we choose to adhere to. I think under the American system of coal classification, this would rate as a lignite. Under the German system, it is a lower rank brown coal.
I see. You make reference in your statement to the 1977 fire at the Hazelwood mine, which we've heard a good deal about. Were you working at the Hazelwood mine at the time?
I was.
And you say that you weren't directly involved in suppressing that fire, but you certainly had experience both of the fire and of the inquiry that was held in its aftermath. Is that right?
I was involved in suppressing the fire. I manned hoses at one stage, but the bulk of my duties were as a guide within the mine to take firefighting personnel who had come from outside the environment to particular locations in order to combat the fire.
You noted paragraph 23 of your statement that your personal learning from the fire was that the steep slope of the batters made it difficult to fight the fires from levels above or below the burning coal batters. What was the height of the batters that were involved in the 1977 fire that you referred to there?
Two heights, either 20 metres or 12 metres.
Right. Are you able to indicate how that compares to the height of, say, the northern batters that were so extensively involved in the fire of this year?
It's the same. The northern batters are either 20 metres high or 12 metres in terms of the individual batters. The whole batter system is in excess of 100 metres high, but the individual batters are either about 20 metres or about 12 metres.
Right. And we know in relation to the northern batters that there are several levels. I think the evidence is 7 levels of batters that altogether make up the northern batters. Does that sound right, or are you not?
Well, there are 8 operating levels.
Yes.
And a number of intermediary levels.
And that overall height of the batters presumably is dictated by the amount of coal that was won from that particular area when it was operational. Is that right?
Well, basically by the thickness of the seam, because the seam has been mined from top to bottom.
Yes. And you make observations in your statement about the incredible depth of the coal seams in the valley compared, say, to brown coal mines in Germany.
Yes, equivalent brown coal mines in Germany have almost the reverse overburden to coal ratio. We're moving something like 15 to 20 metres of overburden to access 100 to 200 metres of coal. Theirs tends to be the reverse.
Right. That has implications, as you note, for rehabilitation of the mines here too, does it not?
Basically, we're stuck with large voids here.
Yes. Whereas
in Germany, they can be largely backfilled.
Yes, from the overburden that is removed.
Correct.
Yeah. You talk at paragraph 24 in your statement about the dedicated fire service, and the inquiry's already heard evidence from Mr Freshwater and Mr Brown about those matters. I want to ask you particularly about what you say about paragraph 27, about the loss of numbers, that is the reduction from 11,000 people employed by the SECV down to a little more than 2,000 following privatisation, but more importantly the expertise that was taken out of the mines. Can you expand on that?
Yes, there's no doubt that there was a dissipation of local expertise at the time of privatisation, and large numbers of professional people, I'm not sure if it was as proportionate as the downsizing, left the industry and left the area. So there was a significant reduction in the amount of experience, expertise and know-how in the mining arena post-privatisation.
That's a topic that you return to in the context of this year's fire, I think, which I'll ask you about now. You were in the valley at home in your lawn on the 9th of February when the fire broke out in the Hazelwood mine?
Your lawn north. Yes,
Yes.
I was.
Wouldn't want to confuse your lawn with your lawn north, sorry. And you say you weren't directly affected, but that seems like something of an understatement. You certainly experienced the need to use your puffer more for your asthma during the time of the fire.
Only when I came to Morwell.
Yep. And you say you didn't seek any medical attention, but it's important not to confuse that with the assumption that there was no effect on a person's health. You give a good example of that, do you not? You had some health effects but didn't feel the need to go and see a doctor.
Oh, not specifically with regard to shortness of breath experience in Morwell. I should add that I'm an asthmatic, and that asthmatic condition has resulted in my lung capacity being considerably lower than what would be expected of a healthy male of my age.
Yes.
But I cope with that, and it doesn't affect my lifestyle very much. However, my experience was that when I visited Morwell, which I probably did on 8 or 9 occasions during the course of the fire, if the wind was in the wrong quarter and there was the acrid smoke odour and the ash, then I certainly felt a tightness of breath, which caused me to empathise with people who would have breathing difficulties but were required to continue living in Morwell.
You, of course, had the good fortune of being able to go home to your lawn north at the end of the day.
Yes, where the air was purer and cleaner. But yes, that's correct. I would not have wanted to have been a resident of Morwell at that stage with a respiratory disorder that I endure.
Yes. And at paragraph 30, you refer the inquiry to a meeting at the Curnow Hall on the 18th of February, which we've already heard a deal of evidence about. Your wife went to the meeting, not accompanied by you, it would seem?
No, I think I must have relented and let her out on her own, but I had another engagement that night. But she came home and reported what had transpired there in terms of some of the reactions by the concerned community members and some of the responses by those in authority.
So she was free to go, but on the condition that a detailed report is provided back, is that right?
No, that wasn't a condition, but it was nevertheless fulfilled.
What she told you was that the incident controller, Mr Foss, the then incident controller, told the meeting that he and the other members of the emergency services were seeking some expert input from people in New South Wales about how to put out the fire.
I'm not sure if that was Mr Foss or not, but it was announced that interstate expertise was being sourced to advise on the fire. And that's something that caused my wife to think, well, why are they looking interstate for experts in materials that are significantly different to our brown coal when there are a number of people here who hadn't yet escaped the Latrobe Valley, but were available with a lot of background knowledge and, I suppose, experience in the nature of brown coal, the mining of it, and more particularly the remediation of fires.
Not surprisingly, a name that came to your wife's mind was you, and she gave your details to Mr. Foss. Is that right?
That's correct. She thought that I might not so much be able to advise the incident controllers or the team on technical matters, but to alert them to the reality that there were a number of other former State Electricity Commission and, in fact, electricity mining industry personnel still available.
And so the day after the fire, after being contacted by Mr. Foss, you went into the Traralgon Incident Control Centre and spoke to his Operations Performance Manager, Mr. Pettit. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you set out from paragraph 31 onwards in your statement that Mr. Pettit was quite candid about the difficulties that were being faced by the emergency services trying to put out the fire.
That was my understanding.
And what were, in summary, what were the difficulties that were conveyed to you that they were having?
They couldn't put the fire out. They were attacking it with helicopters and tankers.
Yes.
And Kevin, I recall, made mention of the fact that it was a frustrating exercise because a tanker or a helicopter would attack a particular area and they'd have to go away and get more water. By the time they got back, combustion had re-established itself.
Yes.
That didn't overly surprise me because I just, going back to my original statement, my experience, not my expertise, but my experience suggested that application of water, if that was the only material available to combat the fire, needed to be very consistent and in significant volumes.
So two things there, vast quantities of water and constant application of the water over a lengthy period of time.
Correct. To almost flood an area of combustion was required, otherwise it turned out to be a relatively fruitless exercise, and the evidence of that is that it took over 6 weeks to remediate the fire in this occasion, despite considerable manpower and machinery being available.
Excuse me, Mr. Rosen, if I may. Mr. Dalton, we've heard evidence to the inquiry that mine stability is an issue because this particular mine at Hazelwood sits on an aquifer. So is it your experience that the application of volumes of water, as you've just spoken around, must be also taken into account the stability issues in relation to the aquifer? Can you just describe to me how those two things are balanced?
Yes, the mine stability is not in the first instance related to the presence of the aquifer. The individual batter stability is very sensitive to the height of groundwater within the coal. That is easily and quickly recharged by the application of large quantities of surface water. That was one of the drivers that caused the movement in the northern batters when the main drain created some sinkholes and recharged the groundwater system. The underlying aquifers have been largely depressurised, and if they weren't controlled, eventually the whole stability of the mine would be, in my opinion, under threat. The individual stability of batters is very sensitive to water. We saw that also recently with the collapse of the northern batters in Yallourn mine. So I have concerns about the application of very large quantities of water within the batter system of the mine. Having said that, I acknowledge that in order to remediate the fire, very large quantities of water have traditionally been required. I would prefer to see the application of the water in the form of foam or polymer, which would not penetrate and recharge the groundwater system. But as has been suggested, my overriding preference would be to prevent the spread of fire in the first instance. Because there certainly are risks with applying large quantities of water in terms of geotechnical stability of batters. The inherent density or specific gravity of brown coal is 1.12. It's not much heavier than water itself. It almost floats.
Could I ask a question relating to rain? I take it if you have good, strong, heavy rain, that's an advantage. But if you have intermittent rain, that would be a disadvantage?
In terms of controlling fire?
Yes.
Not necessarily a disadvantage. I think the application of any water does tend to be remedial. At one place in my statement, I've indicated that the application of water in heavy jets, or let's say dumping from helicopters, may be deleterious because it can help spread burning coal particles. But the liberal but relatively gentle application of water with sprays or rain would generally be remedial, but periodic rain would help, but nowhere near as much as a consistent downpour.
The other context to that Commissioner Lapsley referred to was that just a smallish amount of rain had the effect of impeding the progress of vehicles to and from and in the area because it created mud and a variety of things of that kind.
In that he is correct. A lot of the roads, particularly as I understand it, a lot of the roads or access levels in the abandoned areas of the mine are not necessarily still easily traversable in the sense that they may have been when there was liberal crushed rock applied. If it's now only a clay seal, that clay does get very slippery, and vehicles that aren't six-wheel drive, for example, will find that difficult to traverse. So, yes, in that sense, in terms of access, rain can be a problematic issue.
Again, on a different tack in relation to wind, I take it that the wind that blows into the batters is likely, as appears to have happened on the 9th, to, if it comes from the southwest or from the west, it's likely to extend quite quickly the fire along batters generally?
I believe so, and that's been my experience in the past. If there's no wind, the coal smoulders aggressively, if that's quite the right word, but visible flames will soon be generated if there is significant air movement. It doesn't necessarily require wind from outside either. The simple burning of the batters tends to cause updrafts or katabatic updrafts, or pseudo-katabatic updrafts within the mine, so that hot air rising, of course, will create its own vortices, and they will be deleterious to fighting the fire. So that's another aspect that can go from one thing to another in a causative way, which is problematic.
Now, I think, Mr Galton, you've been in the hearing room today while Ms White from the mine regulator, as it was referred to, has been giving evidence about rehabilitation. You refer to that at paragraph 38 of your statement, making the point that you don't think there was much done by way of rehabilitation during the SEC days. You make a reference to some limited rehabilitation at paragraph 38. And you note at 40 that the land area occupied by the Hazelwood mine can't be rehabilitated back to what it was due to the large disparity between volumes of coal and overburden removed. And that's what you've already been referring to earlier in terms of the proportion of overburden as against coal that's been removed from the void that is there for all of us to see. Is that right?
That is correct.
41, you say that there are parts that haven't been operational for decades, and you see no operational reason why old parts of the mine can't be progressively rehabilitated in as far as this is practicable. Would you include the northern batters in that description?
I would, but I would also doubt that it's practicable to rehabilitate the northern batters. The definition of rehabilitation, I forget, but if I could share with you my definition.
Yes.
I believe rehabilitation is, if you like, the replication as close to as possible to the original habitat, both flora and fauna. And my comments there with regard to the voids that will remain, inevitably, is that that land can't be brought back to what it was before, nor would anyone suggest that it could be.
Yes.
Rehabilitation, though, could occur within a mine, but I'm not sure that that would be a priority even at this stage. Rehabilitation has been used across the board to suggest that the batter should be covered with clay and then topsoil and then replanted with vegetation. I personally am not sure that that would be such a great idea to have the mine full of resown vegetation. I certainly agree that at the end of mining, an attempt to bring the environment back to as natural as possible is justifiable and desirable. But while the mine is operating, I don't see that as very practicable. But I do see that fire prevention, in terms of covering the batters, may well be a very desirable activity to undertake. As I suspect been noted, in order for the batters to be properly rehabilitated, they would need to be brought back to an angle perhaps 30 degrees or less rather than the 45 degrees which the average batter now adopts.
Yes.
Otherwise, any attempt to apply clay and topsoil will end in failure because it will either slump off or wash off.
Yes.
So there's a huge cost impost in reducing the batters to that angle, and that would also, I suspect, inhibit access and have a whole lot of operational ramifications. So rather than contemplate rehabilitation per se within an operating mine, I would think it would be more desirable, given our recent circumstances, to contemplate fire protection, which may not require the further excavation of the batter systems, simply to cover them with a suitable substance that would inhibit the commencement of fire or the spreading of it.
All of which brings us to paragraph 46 of your statement, Mr Galton, where you raise that very issue. What you're contemplating, as I understand it there, is coating the old and vulnerable exposed batters, including the northern batters, with a fire protectant such as stabilised clay and cement mixture. And you note that wouldn't classify as rehabilitation, but it may provide some short to medium term protection in terms of preventing fire, or at least reducing the impact of a fire that did start. Is that right?
That's correct. And again, I have no particular expertise in that area, and I have no idea what would be a suitable material to coat the batter systems with. But I've had some experience in securing the stability of cuttings and underground openings, and I'm aware of the use of, say, shotcrete. Now, shotcrete, which is a specially formulated cement mixture fired at vertical or even overhead faces,
yes,
by a cannon or a jet, may well be able to be adapted to open pit use. Rather than shotcrete per se, perhaps a mixture of bentonite, clay and cement might be worth trying, or any spectrum of other materials that could adhere to a 45-degree brown coal face and prove to adhere and create a barrier between that coal face and the atmosphere, which would not only prevent combustion through embers dropping into the mine and help to control the spread of fire, but it would also act as an oxygen retarding barrier which would help to preclude the unique combustion of brown coal, which is so difficult to remediate.
Can you draw the inquiry's attention to any research either in Australia or overseas that might have examined these issues?
Sadly, no, because largely, partly through my ignorance, but also largely because we have such a unique situation here.
Yes.
This is the only place in the world where huge, massively thick seams of brown coal are mined and exposed to the atmosphere, with the intrinsic consequences of that.
There might be a need for a homegrown solution to the problem, Mr Galton.
I would agree with that.
All right. They're the questions I have for Mr Galton. Members of the board have any other questions? I understand Ms Doyle has one question.
Mr Milton, I just wanted to ask you something arising from paragraph 46 of your statement, the last paragraph we've just taken to, where you propose a solution using clay and cement mixture. That proposal there doesn't take account of the horizontal bores which are through the batters to provide drainage in those areas, does it? In other words, you haven't considered that issue.
Well, I have, but the outlet for the horizontal bores is generally a metre or so of PVC casing which extends from the face. So those horizontal bores would not necessarily be obscured, by...
Then that answers my question. You assume that the opening is left unobscured somehow under this process?
Yes, it's left unobscured because with horizontal drains, there's normally around about a metre of borehole casing left projecting from the face. And that takes the water out and discharges it into the tow drain.
And have you given consideration to how this solution would interact with any hotspots that are located below the area to be covered in the clay and cement mixture?
No, I would hope that hotspots would be excavated prior to the application of any material. And I need to make it clear that it's not a suggestion of clay and cement. This was really put in to indicate that that is a possibility, but we need to research suitable materials for that.
And you're not aware of this proposal having been used in any open-cut brown coal mines or other open-cut mines?
Shotcreting has been used in other open-cut mines to enhance the stability of unstable batters. I don't believe it's been used as a fire protection measure in any coal mine, whether brown or black, in the past.
I have no further questions, Mr. Galton.
We have no questions of Dr. Galton. Thank you.
I've got no re-examination and... Thank you. And Ms Richards will take the final witness today.
The next witness is Jason Pullman from Latrobe City Council. Mr Pullman, could you come forward, please?
Please state your full name.
Jason John Pullman.
Please raise the Bible and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
To this Board of Inquiry.
To this Board of Inquiry.
Will be the truth.
Will be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Nothing but the truth.
Good afternoon, Mr Pullman. I'll ask you again to please state your full name and your work address.
Jason John Pullman.
And you're employed by the Latrobe City Council as the Coordinator of Strategic Planning?
Yes.
And that's a position that you have held since 2007?
2007.
You've made a statement to the inquiry, which is a statement of 49 paragraphs and 7 attachments. Do you have a copy of that there with you?
Yes, I do.
Are there any corrections that you would like to make to the statement or additions?
No, thank you.
Is the statement true and correct?
Yes, it is.
I tender that.
Exhibit 61.
Thank you, Your Honour. Just a little about your own background first, Mr Pullman. You've been employed in your current role since 2007. Before that, you were working in a statutory planning role and a strategic planning role for the Wellington Shire Council.
That's correct.
And you did that for 8 years, from 1999 through to 2007.
Yes, that's correct.
And that might be an appropriate point to ask you about the difference between statutory planning and strategic planning.
Without self-incrimination, the statutory planning basically involves the assessment of planning permits and enforcement of the planning scheme. Strategic planning usually doesn't involve planning permits, but looks after matters of strategic land use policy and or planning scheme amendments that are required to be made to the planning scheme.
All right, so strategic planning involves looking at the big picture, at the planning scheme that applies in a particular municipality in this case, what it provides, what it should provide, how it can be altered to meet the council's strategic objectives.
Yes.
And statutory planning involves making decisions within that framework.
That's correct.
You have some formal qualifications as well that bear on your work. You have a Bachelor of Arts in Urban Planning.
Yes.
And you've also completed a Master's degree in Social Science, which involved you looking at regional economics, housing and town planning in regional Australia after the Second World War. Did that have any particular focus on the Latrobe Valley region?
Indirectly, yes. It looked at Australia as a whole, Victoria, the Gippsland region, and then looked at a number of municipalities within the region, those being Latrobe Valley and the Sale area as well, in Wellington Shire.
And just to be clear, Wellington Shire adjoins Latrobe City, is
yes,
that
that's
correct? In which direction?
To the east.
To the east, thank you. Now, I'd just like to, without going into a great level of detail, and land use planning lends itself to a lot of detail, put some general propositions to you about the way in which land use planning is regulated in Victoria. The principal act is the Planning and Environment Act, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And it is administered by the Minister for Planning,
yes,
who is advised by what is now known as the Department of Transport Planning and Local Infrastructure.
Yes.
And it was until fairly recently known as the Department of Planning and Community Development.
That's correct.
Or DPCD. The Minister is a planning authority for the purposes of a local planning scheme, and so is the local council for that municipality.
Yes.
But a local planning scheme can only be amended with the approval of the Minister.
Yes, that's correct.
So in the usual course, an amendment would be proposed, put forward by a council, which would manage the local consultation processes, and ultimately it would not take effect unless approved by the Minister.
That would be a normal process. Another process is whereby the Minister steps in and runs that particular part of the process, him or herself.
And there's also an ability for a planning panel to be involved in hearing submissions about a proposed amendment and making recommendations
That's
to
correct.
either or both of the council and the Minister.
Usually what happens if the council run a planning scheme amendment, an independent planning panel is appointed at the request of the council. If the Minister runs a planning scheme amendment, she may appoint an advisory committee to undertake a similar function.
Now, once you have a planning scheme in place, the council is generally the responsible authority for deciding applications for permits or subdivisions within that scheme.
That's the normal process. Again, the Minister has the opportunity to step in with planning permit applications and become the planning authority as well on rare occasions.
And the planning scheme, and we'll take the one here in Latrobe as the specific, is a combination of state and local planning provisions.
Yes, that's correct.
So we see in the Victoria planning provisions a suite of different provisions that can be assembled by a council to make up its local planning scheme.
Yes, council chooses from the state government provisions that are provided, or the VPPs as they have been known since the mid-1990s. Council has the ability to insert local sections into the planning scheme under a strict state government framework.
And that framework involves a state planning policy framework and a local planning policy framework.
Yes.
And the local framework has to be consistent with the state framework.
Yes.
But the council does get an opportunity within the state framework to set its own strategy and articulate the direction it desires to take.
It, at the moment, under the current structure, although it is under review by the state government, under the current structure, council doesn't have an ability to change the state planning policy. It does have an ability to tell its own story through the local planning policy and or schedules, change some of the schedules or fill in, populate tables essentially in some of the zones and overlays. So the schedules to those zones and overlays.
And to come to zones and overlays, every piece of land within a municipality is zoned and it can only have one zone.
Yes, it can only have one zone, that's correct.
But it can have a range of different overlays.
Yes.
And one that at least Justice Teague is familiar with is what's now called the bushfire management overlay or bushfire protection overlay.
As one of the overlays.
But there's a whole range of different overlays. And then there are a series of particular provisions that appear in every planning scheme.
That's correct, yes.
All right. Now, I've made an attempt to extract from the Latrobe City Planning Scheme the provisions that are relevant to the management of bushfire risk. So I'll give you, ask that you be shown a folder, and we do have copies of this for the parties as well. And perhaps you could just start by looking at the index, ignoring what appears at 21, because I'll take you to that later on. The first two relate to the state planning policy framework, and in particular clause 13, which includes environmental risks, and that includes bushfire. There's a particular section in clause 13 that has a fairly high-level policy statement about bushfire.
Yes.
And then 4 through to 11 are essentially the Latrobe City Municipal Strategic Statement.
Yes.
Then 36.01 deals with the public use zone, and when we come to look at the timber plantations, we'll see why that's relevant. And then 13, clause 37, deals with the special use zone, which is the zone that's used in Latrobe City for brown coal resources.
Yes.
So the Hazelwood mine and the other open cut mines are zoned special use zone, and there is a Schedule 1 to that zone that deals specifically with that kind of use.
That's correct, yes.
And then we move into the overlays. I've extracted at 14, clause 42.01, the environmental significance overlay, and that matters in this case because there is a designated urban buffer of 1 kilometre between new developments and coal mining areas.
Yes, that's correct.
And then there is the bushfire management overlay at 15.
Yes.
And then we have a number of other specific or particular provisions: the earth and energy resources industry generally, timber production generally, bushfire protection, clause 62, uses, etc., not requiring a permit. And then just before lunch, you identified that we should also refer to Clause 63, existing uses.
Yes, that's correct.
If you're able to say so now, that'd be good, but if you need some time to think about it, that's fine as well. Are there any other provisions of the Latrobe City Planning Scheme that are relevant to the way in which Latrobe City uses its land use planning powers to mitigate fire risk?
I would suggest that's an exhaustive list of the provisions of the scheme. There's probably one or two other areas, but I suspect I would need to check. However, I would say that's probably 100% correct.
Well, if after you've completed giving your evidence there are others that occur to you, please feel free to let us know.
Yes.
Now, we asked you specifically to deal in your statement with the existence of some timber plantations in close proximity to the Hazelwood mine to the north and the west of the mine. And you do this starting at paragraph 9 of your statement. And you've provided us with a map at Annexure 2. And you have since provided us with another map that we may also look at. All right, so we've substituted this one, have we? All right. Could we actually look at the old one, this one? So this is a map that you prepared and provided us with your, together with your statement late last week, which is a satellite photograph of the Hazelwood mine and the township of Morwell. And there is a red dotted line around the mine, which I am assuming is not the mine licence boundary because it cuts across the current operational area of the mine. Can you tell us what that red dotted line is?
Yeah, the red dotted line is Council's data on the property boundary extent or the title. It does not reflect any mining licence boundary that currently exists or has in the past.
All right, so there's other material available to the inquiry that indicates that there are a series of different titles that make up the mining licence area, which may explain why that dotted line cuts through the current operating area of the mine. You've since produced a second map. Perhaps we could have a look at that. So this is a map headed Location of Mining Licences and Selected Timber Plantations near the Hazelwood mine. And we have a number of thick lines. The thick grey line, I take it, is the mining licence boundary around the Hazelwood mining area. Or it's green.
Grey or green, yes.
And then the yellow lines, the area to the north is presumably around the Yallourn mine.
Yes.
And the area to the west of the Hazelwood mine, what's that?
That's a separate, there's actually two mining licences there to the west. A small one, it extends from Driffield, the annotation of Driffield to the west. And it might be easier if I can point to it.
Yes, there should be a ruler just on your right there.
So the two mining licences, there's a small one here. You can see follows it almost like the alignment of a creek or a depression. And the other mining licence is this one, wraps in around here, immediately to the west.
All right. Now, what's the source of the boundaries that you have depicted on this map?
Those mining licence boundaries were sourced from DSDBI's website on the 2nd of June 2014.
Now, can you... there are some areas shaded in grey-blue.
Yes.
And those designate areas where there are existing timber plantations, do they not?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, it might be easiest to return to the previous map, just to identify those. And these are all timber plantations that you have identified that are within 1,000 metres or 1 kilometre of, well, initially the property boundary for the main Hazelwood mine title.
That's correct. The two maps do differ somewhat with regards to the location of the plantations. The second map shows an additional plantation which I've included on the second map identification of the plantation up here, which is not shown in yellow. It is further than 1 kilometre. There's a reason why I've shown it on the second map, and I'd be happy to expand on that if required.
All right. Well, why don't we have the second map back and you can expand away.
Okay. So I've highlighted, and I should point out that the greeny blue areas here, 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 and here are not to scale, and I've drawn those on for indicative illustration purposes. They haven't come from the DSDBI website. I've put them on in addition to the sketched outline of the Morwell Township. So the plantations that appear on the previous map is this one down here, to the south, this one here, this one here, and this one here. So that's the only one I've additionally shaded in, and the reason for that is because they fall within the existing mining licence areas as depicted on the map. The previous plan, it's obviously the mining licences aren't shown, and those plantations are only within, say, 1,000 or 1 kilometre. So I've gone a little bit further than requested in answering the question.
Right. Well, the question was to identify maps within. Was to identify. Let's be clear about that. The location and ownership of timber plantations to the north and west of the mine, and those are the ones you've identified. So let's deal with them one by one. You have dealt with 3 of the 4 in paragraph 10 of your statement.
Yes.
So let's start with the property that you identify as PN 21510. And that is the plantation to the immediate northwest of the mine, quite close to the town as well.
Yes.
And that is owned by Gippsland Water.
That's correct, yes.
Now, my own research has suggested that land is zoned public use.
Yes.
It's Schedule 1 to the public use zone.
Yes.
And within the public use zone, we see from Annexure 3 to your statement, a permit is usually required for a timber plantation unless certain conditions are met. Have I understood that correctly?
That's correct.
Now, your evidence in your statement is that you've searched or caused to be searched the council's permit records back to 1969 and have not identified any permit for that timber plantation on land that's owned by Gippsland Water.
Yes, that's right.
Do you have any, or do you know when that land was first planted with timber?
I'm not aware of any of the plantations when they were first established, no.
All right. Well, let's just assume for the moment, just for the sake of discussion, that it was sometime within the last 15 years. On the surface, there should be a permit for a timber plantation in that location, should there not?
Not necessarily.
All right. Well, explain why not necessarily. And if you would like to do so by reference to the public use zone and the other documents in that folder I handed, please do.
Sure. The first thing we would need to establish is, during that 15-year period, what was the zone? Has it changed? Have the provisions changed, been tweaked? So you would need to undertake some investigation, a bit of a timeline about what the provisions were and when they applied and what they related to. In relation to plantations, we would need to check to see whether or not a plantation use and or development was a planning permit trigger, say over the last 15 years, to use that horizon. The other thing that we would need to have a look at is in the public use zone, we would also need to be careful of the interpretation of whether or not the activity, i.e. the plantation, was carried out by or on behalf of a public land manager, and whether or not that plantation was a utility use as defined under that particular zone. That would be a matter of interpretation. At the moment, my interpretation is not. That would not be a use usual to a utility service provider, and therefore that would probably trigger the need for a planning permit under the current provisions. I don't know what the provisions were over the last 15 years, however.
All right. And the significance of 15 years is that if the land has been used as a timber plantation for 15 years, then that effectively becomes an existing use, and there's no ability for the responsible authority to dispute the right of the landowner to use the land for a timber plantation. Is that a correct interpretation of the way the way Clause 62 operates?
Clause 63?
63, I beg your pardon.
Generally, that's correct. However, if a use was lawfully carried out prior to any changes occurring, i.e., for instance, say the zone change from day 1 to day 2, and that use was an existing use prior to the zoning changing on the following day, that use is considered to be able to be continued. So you've got a number of things. You've got proof of continuous use for 15 years, needs to be established and proven, however. And then you've also got whether or not the use was lawful prior to any things changing in the planning scheme before and after the change.
Right, so as things stand now, if somebody wanted to, if Gippsland Water wanted to plant a timber plantation on that land for the first time, a permit would be required on your interpretation?
If the land was for the first time used as a plantation?
Yes.
Yes, that would be my initial interpretation, yes.
There is no permit for that use, but as you sit there today, you can't explain why that's the case.
That would require further extensive research, and potentially we would not find anything.
Have you made any inquiries directly of Gippsland Water to ascertain the
No,
basis on which it maintains a timber plantation to the northwest of an open cut coal mine?
No, I have not.
Adjacent to the mining licence area? No. The second, I beg your pardon, the second of the plantations that you identify is a plantation to the west of the mine, owned by Grand Ridge Plantations, also known as Hancock Victoria Plantations, and that's property number 19969. Now that's actually two parcels of land that are identified on that map. There's a smaller, well, I should say quadrilateral area, it's not a square, and then immediately to the southwest of that a larger irregular area, and they're both the same property number.
Yes.
Now, that is land in the special use zone.
Both are covered by a special use zone, that's correct.
Yes, both of those areas. And a permit is required for a timber plantation within the special use zone if any part of the plantation is within 1,000 metres of a mining licence area.
Yes, that's correct.
So again, on the face of it, there should be a permit for this timber plantation on the face of it.
Well, not necessarily, subject to any existing use rights that may apply or any provisions that applied at the time of the plantation was first established.
Now, again, you've not identified in the searches that you've had done back to 1969 any permit for...
That's correct. The Council has no records of any permits being issued to the land for a plantation.
This plantation, which again, it's adjacent to a mining licence area, is it not?
It's actually adjacent to and within.
So how might it be, assuming that it's a lawfully operated timber plantation, how might it be that there is a timber plantation to the northwest of an open-cut coal mine?
There are a number of possibilities, without speculating too much. One of them might be that the plantation existed prior to the mining licence being extended in the plantation's direction, and therefore that 1 kilometre may have not existed at the time of the plantation was first established.
So, like Morwell, the plantation may have been there first.
It may or may not have been.
Yes, all right, that's one possibility, all right. Are there other possibilities that might explain?
The other possibility was obviously the existing use provisions might apply, and or the provisions of the scheme at the time may have not required a planning permit. For instance, the requirement for 1,000 square metres isn't from a mining licence, from plantation to a mining licence, isn't a prohibition. At the moment it's a subject to planning permit trigger. Previously, we haven't checked this. I haven't checked this in the schemes dating back. It may not have been. It might have been as of right. I don't know. But that's the other possibility.
Right, and the third area that you've identified in paragraph 10.3 of your statement is the small triangle to the southwest of the mine,
yes.
Which is also owned by Hancock Victoria Plantations, and the same considerations apply as
yes, that's
the
correct.
area we're just discussing. It's in the special use zone. As things stand at present, a permit is required for a timber plantation that is less than 1,000 metres from a mining licence area. There is no permit for this timber plantation, and as you sit there today, you can't explain why that is.
That's correct, yes.
Now, there's a fourth timber plantation that you haven't identified in this paragraph 10, but that sits just to the north of the second area that we looked at. And as I interpreted the second map you produced, within the boundaries of the Yallourn mining licence.
Yes, that's right.
Do you know who owns that land?
Yes, I do. It's owned by Energy Australia, Yallourn Pty Ltd.
All right. There's other evidence before the inquiry that suggests that plantation caught fire on the 9th of February and may have been the source of embers that blew into both the Yallourn mine, or that were thrown into both the Yallourn mine and the Hazelwood mine. Again, do you know whether there is a permit for that particular timber plantation?
No, I haven't done a planning permit search on
that one.
Energy Australia Yallourn land. No, so I'm uncertain of that.
Now, this leads into the next area that I wanted to ask you about, Mr. Pullman, which was whether Council had any input into the 2009 work plan variation that we heard a good deal of evidence about this morning from Ms. White. Let's assume for the moment that all of these plantations were already there 10 years ago. Now, Council wasn't directly involved in the work plan variation, but the work plan variation was the culmination of a very extensive planning process, was it not?
Yes, that's correct. Amendment C32.
Yes, and Council was in fact the proponent of that planning amendment, was it not?
That's correct, yes.
And am I right in assuming that council supported that amendment being made to the planning scheme?
Council made 2 submissions and were in support of the proposal. The main reasons for the support was based on the economic opportunities that the extension and the proposal would provide to the region.
Now, just to be clear, the process that was undertaken was... There were several aspects to the process. There was an environmental effects statement prepared. There was an application to vary the work plan prepared, and those things were both done by Hazelwood. And there was also a need to vary the planning scheme to relocate roads, several roads, and to divert the Morwell River, among other things.
Yes, that's correct.
Again, I should say.
Yes.
This being the 5th such diversion, I think. And council was actively involved in that latter part of the process.
The latter part, the planning scheme amendment?
The planning scheme amendment.
That's correct, yes.
And council prepared the amendment?
The amendment was made at the request of the mine operator at the time. Council would, I didn't prepare the documentation myself. I imagine that council officers, as we do now, would have worked with the mine operator or the proponent of a planning scheme amendment and prepared the documentation jointly. Or at least council would have had a role of probably considering the documentation and seeing whether or not it was fit to be exhibited.
But it's implicit in that, is it not, that council supported the amendment being made to the planning scheme?
I would say yes.
Yes. And there was then a planning panel appointed that considered a whole range of approvals that were necessary, including the variation to the planning scheme or the amendment to the planning scheme.
Yes, that's correct. It's common when there's a number of approvals, whether they be federal, state or local, that one process be run and just to reduce red tape.
Yeah. And Ms White provided us this morning with the quite voluminous report of that planning panel that you'll be relieved to know I won't take you to. But council's stance in that position was generally supportive of the amendments and supportive of the approvals that were being required.
Yes, it was a sort of facilitatory role council played. It was mostly interested in the planning scheme amendment technical matters, because that's where council's expertise lays. But that being said, council were supportive of the proposal, the planning scheme amendment, due to the fact of the recognised economic benefits for the region at the time.
Now, at any stage in that process, did council raise the proximity of these timber plantations, which we're assuming were there 10 years ago, to the proposed extension of the Hazelwood coal mine?
My reading and research hasn't found any evidence of that issue being discussed at council or a consideration of council at the time.
And just so we can be clear, how extensive has your reading and research into that question been?
I've read the panel report. I've read council's submissions at the time to the panel. I've also read the relevant council meeting reports that the officers put up by way of council meetings, and obviously my own local knowledge as well, being in the region.
Right, so can this Board of Inquiry proceed on the basis that the proximity of timber plantations to the mining licence area was just not raised as a consideration in the process that led up to Amendment C32 being approved and the 2009 work plan variation going through?
I could probably only comment on the planning scheme amendment C32 element, which is the area of my expertise. I'm not aware that the plantations and the proximity of the plantations to the Hazelwood mine were raised in a land use planning sense, in the land use planning documents I have read. I cannot confirm or otherwise whether or not they were specifically raised in the EES documentation and the plethora of other documents that supported the EES process.
An environmental effect statement tends to look at the effect of the mining operation on the surrounding environment rather than the reverse, does it not? It doesn't look on the effect of the surrounding environment on the mining operation, generally speaking.
Generally speaking, you are correct, but it's not uncommon for that matter to be discussed during an EES process, in my experience.
I'll move to a different area of your statement. Starting with the heading item 25, where we'd asked that your statement identify specific strategies that Council proposes to improve the livability of the town of Morwell in light of the very close proximity of the town to the mine. Now, you've identified a number of strategic policy documents, which I've looked at, and it's fair to say they're very general strategic documents, are they not?
Yes, that's correct.
There's no specific proposals in there for dealing with the legacy issue that you have, the fact that you have an open cut coal mine several hundred metres from a residential area.
In relation to Hazelwood,
yes,
specifically? That is correct. No, there's no specific reference in those policy documents.
And nor do I find anything in the Latrobe planning scheme that is a specific strategy for dealing with that legacy issue. There is, of course, a desire to have a 1 kilometre coal buffer, but obviously we don't have it in this case. Does Council have any particular strategies or desires as to what it would like to see happen, given the fact that the coal mine and the people and those who work and spend other parts of their lives in South Morwell are neighbours? What would it like to see?
Are you referring to in a land use planning sense?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Ideally, the buffer we would like to see extended. However, we do acknowledge the historical pattern of development and mining activity in the area. In a perfect world, if a mine was to, or a mining licence was to be established, we would be seeking the 1 kilometre urban buffer from the settlement boundary to the mining licence, crest of the open cut operations. And that's in a perfect world. For the situation we have here, often planning finds itself trying to retrofit historical events. Happens quite frequently. It's probably the biggest part of the job, my job at least, is to try and apply policy and retrofit things to give effect to conflicts as opposed to trying to plan ahead for them. It's much harder to do that. So it would be fair to say a larger or the full 1 kilometre buffer would be appropriate, but we do acknowledge the existing pattern of development doesn't allow for that.
So practically speaking, the only way that could be achieved is by rehabilitation of that part of the mine closest to the southern parts of Morwell.
Well, I don't know about the economics of that. It's not my area of expertise.
No,
However,
I'm asking you about the land use planning side of things. We'll leave the
just
economics
based on
to
land use
others.
planning, I think one could conclude it'd be fairly difficult to relocate the southern part of Morwell. I don't know what the benefits and pros are with regards to the remediation works to achieve that 1 kilometre buffer in towards the mine with existing operations. I don't know what the... I wouldn't be able to comment technically on that, but one would presume from a land use planning point of view, we would see the protection of the southern part of Morwell as the preeminent concern.
Now, what about the existence of several timber plantations in such close proximity to the mine? Is there any land use planning solution to what appears to be an inconsistent adjoining uses?
Well, at the moment, as we've discussed, under particular zones, there is a preference by way of a condition that planning permit trigger condition for a preferred distance of 1 kilometre from a new plantation from a mining licence boundary. Now, from a land use planning point of view, you could argue for a preference potentially for the current zones or overlays or another planning trigger to be strengthened to make sure that new plantations or existing plantations try and achieve that buffer distance of 1 kilometre from a mining licence boundary.
So new plantations, I'm following that there would be, well, there already are requirements for council approval within 1 kilometre of a mining licence boundary. Those could be strengthened. But what about the existing plantations? Is there any land use planning solution to that?
That would require a fundamental change to the way the planning schemes are structured, and those changes would be to do with the state planning policy section, which council does not have an ability to change. And what I mean by that is you would need to, if you were to pick up the existing plantations, I suspect but can't confirm that they would have existing use rights. If they do, the clause 63, I think it was, from memory,
yes.
63, existing use rights would need to be changed to specifically make mention of existing uses and or developments in relation to timber plantations. Again, however, that is a matter for the state government. But that would be one way that you could pick up existing plantations within close proximity to mining licences.
And in land use planning terms, it's a fairly drastic step to take to tell a landowner with an existing use right that that use cannot continue.
I suspect that would be a matter for much discussion. Compensation may arise, that word, and other matters. So yes, it would be very difficult.
And no doubt the landowner would have some views.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like now to ask you, and I see the time, but I only have two more brief areas to ask Mr. Pullman. I'd like now to ask you, Mr. Pullman, to have a look at another document. This is the La Trobe Municipal Fire Management Plan that was annexed to La Trobe City's submission to the inquiry. Is this a document that you're familiar with, Mr. Pullman?
I'm aware of it in title, however, I'm not aware of its content and haven't been involved with its preparation.
All right. It's prepared by the La Trobe City Municipal Fire Prevention Committee, or Fire Management Planning Committee, excuse me. And there are various agencies are represented on that committee. But for present purposes, I'd like to take you to Attachment A1, Register of Assets at Risk, which appears starting at page 31 of the document. And then if we can turn to page 50 of the document, which has the entry in the register that's relevant to the Hazelwood Power Precinct.
Yes.
You have that there?
Yes, I do.
You see the second from the bottom on that page identifies the Hazelwood Power Precinct as the asset that's at risk. There's a potential for fire in the mines as a result of either an internal or external fire event. Disruption, long-term loss of power to the national grid. Restoration times could be significant and potentially uneconomic. There's a number of existing treatments that are identified in the next column. There's an identification or a classification of the risk. The likelihood is likely, the consequence is catastrophic, and the risk is identified to be extreme. And then there's identified another risk treatment that's recommended, land use planning considerations for surrounding land use.
Yes, I can see that there.
Have you, before being taken to this document, been made aware of that proposed treatment for managing fire risk for the Hazelwood Power Precinct?
No, this is the first time today that I've seen this information.
So it follows from that, does it not, that you, as the coordinator of strategic planning, have not been working on land use planning considerations for surrounding land use that may mitigate the fire risk at the Hazelwood Power Precinct?
I've not worked on any specific projects dealing with fire as it relates to mining operations, no.
There's a similar proposed or recommended treatment that appears in the Gippsland Regional Strategic Fire Management Plan. And can I assume from the answers that you've just given that you are not aware of that proposed treatment or recommended treatment in the Regional Fire Management Plan either?
That's correct.
And have not been approached about implementing that recommended treatment?
That's correct.
Thank you. I've no further questions for Mr. Pullman. I understand from Ms. Doyle that she has about 15 minutes, 10 possibly, and no one else has expressed a desire to ask him any questions at all.
Mr. Pullman, I take it from the questions that you were just asked, you're really dealing with a negative. You're dealing with an absence of material in relation to these plantations. You've done a search and you can't find any permits for them. I want to ask you what you think might be the more likely explanation. Is it more likely that all three commenced their lives outside of the lawful uses permitted under a planning scheme, or is it more likely that the three of them were instituted at a time when they did not require a planning permit?
I can't answer that without the research or information in front of me. It could be either of those options. We would need to search photos, etc., to establish existing use rights, etc. And because that work hasn't been done, I'm unable to answer that question with any certainty. But it could be either of those options.
Or you could ask Gippsland Water or Hancock when they planted their plantations and pursuant to what permission?
That's an option, yes.
It seems easier. Yes?
Yes.
Right. Have you seen in your searches, I know you were looking for planning permits, but have you seen any correspondence passing between either of the owners of those plantations, Gippsland Water or Hancock, passing between them and the CFA or between them and the owners of the open cut mine?
No. I was focusing on land use planning documents, and I haven't seen any other documents, no, that relate to that activity.
All right. Now, I wanted to ask you a question arising from the discussion you've just had about what could now be done, and you talked about retrofitting solutions. I took it from the answers you gave that it's your evidence that only the Minister for Planning could now change the zones surrounding the Hazelwood mine.
Yes.
And similarly, that even if the Minister for Planning did so, you've posited one great problem there, which is that the recognition of existing uses in Victoria means that the owners of those plantations would certainly want to be heard about the impact on their resource.
Yes, I would have thought so.
In the map which was JP2 to your statement, the satellite one, can I just ask you to clarify, when you drew the 1 kilometre buffer, what is that a reference to? In various documents attached to your statement, there are references to coal buffers and 1 kilometre, but what is the origin of your orange line? What planning document do you take that from?
Yes. This JP2, the annexure,
yes,
referred to, the buffer is a computer-generated buffer from the red hatched area, which is the mine property boundary. It is not what I would say, the planning scheme environmental significance overlay urban buffer. It is a buffer just around the current council recorded title of the Hazelwood mine.
So it doesn't emanate from any planning scheme, it is just the result of you drawing a 1 kilometre line around the mine?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Now, paragraph 20 of your statement, I want to ask you a couple of questions about that. And you refer there to the Latrobe Planning Scheme, in particular clause 21.07. And you say there that it seeks to ensure that timber production takes into account the need for the effective fire protection of a coal resource. Can I take you to attachment JP5, which is the one you're referring to there? Behind tab 5 in your statement, you've set out, or you've attached that clause 21.7. And we can see in it a couple of mentions of coal resources and strategies in relation to coal buffers. I just want to ask you to clarify, where in that document is there any consideration given to the dangers that plantations or timber production activities might pose to a mine or to a coal resource?
I would need to read that clause again in some detail to find the exact location. There is some discussion in there from memory about the risk of fire. Whether or not it says plantation specifically, I would need to read the document again.
Because I just wanted to suggest to you, if you look at page 4 of clause 21.07 under the heading strategies, you see that subheading there? And then objective 6, coal resources. And it talks there about the use and development in the coal resource, mutually protecting urban amenity and coal resource development. And the very last dot point under strategies is timber production has a lesser priority than the extraction of coal and agricultural land use activity unless a proper economic assessment shows it to be viable. So pausing there, all I can see so far is a suggestion that coal resource and urban amenity each should take account of the other, and that in terms of economic activity, that timber production is rated lower than coal winning activities. Would you agree with that up to there?
Yes.
All right, and then at page 5, there's a reference to coal buffers overview. And again, that seems to be focused on a buffer between a coal resource and an urban settlement. Apart from, see the second dot point, a suggestion that the Australian paper mill site in Maryvale will be protected from coal operations in the Yallourn mine. You see that dot point there?
Yes.
Now, what that seems to be suggesting is it's confined to that mine, but also the other way round. In other words, that the paper mill will be protected from the coal mine and not vice versa. Do you see that?
Yes.
I think perhaps at page 6 there might be the clause that you were perhaps thinking of under objective 3, coal buffers strategies. You see the second dot point there? Ensure that any use or development in a buffer area is undertaken in a manner which minimises the potential impacts from sources including earth subsidence, noise, dust, fire hazard and visual intrusion associated with open cut mining. And then the next dot point, ensure that the same things, management, use or development of land in a buffer area, minimises potential fire risk to open cut mining. Was it perhaps that last dot point that you had in mind when you were referring to that in your statement?
My statement should be almost an extract from the relevant provisions. So where that matter is extracted from is the point I was trying to make.
Okay.
If I haven't referred to a strategy or an objective, I didn't mean to refer to it in my statement.
I have to say I can't see anything in clause 21.07 which specifically suggests that timber production should take into account the need for it to be wary of posing a fire risk to mines, other than that dot point I just took you to, which might encompass that. You're not able at this stage to point to any other specific strategy vis-a-vis plantations posing a risk to mines.
Not without reading it. It's quite a lengthy clause, that particular 2107, and obviously highlighting those if they exist. That's correct.
Okay. I also just want to ask you about paragraph 22 of your statement. And there you say that while not all timber plantations are required to have a permit, all timber production activities... Sorry, I should just wait for you to get that. You see paragraph 22? Yes. So the point you're making there is while not all plantations need to have a permit, the process or the activity of timber production, except for some exceptions you outlined, must comply with the Code of Practice 2007.
Yes, that's correct.
That code is, if you like, incorporated by the planning scheme, isn't it? Because it's specifically referred to in the scheme. It's a document that is able to be enforced by council by those means.
It's important to understand what the purpose of the Code of Practice for Timber Production actually sets out to achieve in a local government and what local government's powers are. It doesn't trigger the need for planning permits. It's more a control over the harvesting or cooping or coop harvesting of timber production when it's ready to be felled and whatnot, the timber. So council's powers with regards to enforcing or seeking endorsement is that a coop plan is submitted to council and council is required to endorse that coop plan, and it's principally looking for matters of traffic and or environmental issues or impact on streams, etc.
Right. Because if you look at attachment 6 to your statement, that's where you set out this part, this relevant part at 58.18, 52.18. This is at attachment JP6. You see it says there, all timber production activities, except with some exclusions, must comply with the Code of Practice for Timber Production. First question I wanted to ask you is that not a means by which the content of the code is given life? Namely, you have to comply with this scheme, and the scheme says you must comply with the code. So by that means, it has force.
Well, not in a land use planning sense, because remember, the only time a matter has force is if there's a planning permit trigger, for instance, where council has discretion to have any control over the matter. In some instances, as I've discussed, a planning permit is not required for timber plantation. So therefore the planning scheme, although it's referenced, and the planners per se at council would not have any control from a land use planning point of view. Where they would have control is in a separate matter, as I said before, where the land or the timber coop is harvested.
That's my question. You've got some control by these means over the use of the land, even though you can't be the gatekeeper in relation to the permit question.
I would say limited control, yes.
Okay. Can I ask you, I provided earlier today some hard copies of the code that you refer to in your statement, a Code of Practice from 2007. I think a copy is going to be given to you. And there's a couple of copies, I'm sorry, not quite enough at this stage, but a couple of copies to share around. I just wanted to ask this, Mr. Pullman. This code was developed by the Department of Sustainability and the Environment.
Yes.
Do you know whether the council was given the opportunity to have input into its content?
I can't comment on that. I'm unaware if they were. However, what I can say is it would be normal for a local government probably to be involved in some way. I understand the Code of Practice is currently under review at the moment. 2013, went out for exhibition for comment. I suspect council may have been involved in some way by way of discussions, workshops with DSE or the relevant agency, but I can't confirm that.
And I don't know whether you've had a chance to look at it or look at it recently, but would it be fair to say that this Code of Practice is focused on issues of biodiversity, Indigenous heritage, amenity for people working and living near the plantation, but does not have a focus on the fire risk that plantations pose to other infrastructure near them?
I would need to read the document again. I wouldn't be able to confirm that, and the reason for that is the Code of Practice for timber production isn't an area that planners usually get involved with, land use planners. It's more the environmental planners or the former DSE department. This is not a document that I'm 100% familiar with and know its content in and out, because I'm actually not required to as part of my expertise at council.
Do you know of any limitation on, if this, as you say, this code is under review, any limitation on the code addressing questions of fire risk mitigation?
I'm unaware of that, sorry. No, I don't know.
I have no further questions for Mr. Pullman.
If the board pleases, I have 2 minutes worth of pre-examination. Now I'm getting to come. Mr. Pullman, you were asked about paragraph 20 of your statement and your comment that the current
Latrobe Planning Scheme at clause 21.07 seeks to ensure that timber production takes into account the need for effective fire protection for a coal resource.
Yes.
And you were taken to exhibit JP5, and it was suggested that that didn't seem to be reflected in JP5. Can I ask you to have a look on page 3, the fourth last dot point on that page?
Can you read that dot point out to me, please, just to make sure I've got the right...
So it begins, ensure that timber production takes into account the need for effective fire protection for the coal resource.
Yes, I can see that.
Is that what you were referring to in paragraph 20 of your statement?
Yes, that's correct.
You're also asked questions about, and it came up in the answers that you gave, existing use and the concept of existing use. Can I hand to the board and to the parties, this is just a copy of section 63 of the Latrobe Planning Permit. I don't think it made it into the folder. Sorry. Do you have a copy there, Mr. Pullman?
Yes, I do.
Can I just direct you momentarily to clause 63(1), which states an existing use right is established in relation to use of land under this scheme if any of the following apply. The use was lawfully carried out immediately before the approval date. Are you able to explain to the board the meaning of the approval date in that context?
Yes, in this, as it's referred to, the approval date would refer to the approval date of a change in the planning scheme, usually by way of a planning scheme amendment. So, for instance, I mentioned this previous, but for instance, let's paint a hypothetical. Say the land was zoned farming zone on Thursday, and then Thursday evening, when it was gazetted, it was zoned a more restrictive zone that required a planning permit for a plantation, where the former zone on the Thursday did not require a planning permit under the scenario. The use was then on the Thursday carried out lawfully before the approval date of the change in rules, planning rules effectively.
And in those circumstances, is it your evidence that the pre-existing use would be able to continue without having to obtain a permit from the council?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sorry. In the example that you just gave, where there was a particular use on one day,
yes,
it's called the Thursday, the change that was made and gazetted on the Friday,
yes,
the change that was made required a permit to be obtained,
yes,
for the use that was happening on the day before on the Thursday. Is it your evidence that the use that was happening on the Thursday could continue as an existing use without the need to apply for and obtain a permit?
Yes, that is correct. We would not seek a retro fit permit, and we would not have the power to do so in any case.
They were my questions.
Thank you. I've no re-examination for Mr Pullman, although I do need to tender a number of documents arising out of his evidence. The first document that I would like to tender and include as part of attachment 2 to his statement is the additional map headed location of mining licences and selected timber plantations near the Hazelwood mine. Then I would like to tender as a separate exhibit the Latrobe City Planning Scheme folder. Thank you, Your Honour, and include within that clause 63 that Mr Slattery just took Mr Pullman to. And then if I could tender the Latrobe City Fire Management Plan for 2013 to 2016. And then for completeness, can I also tender the Code of Practice for Timber Production 2007 that Ms Doyle referred to? And with that, may Mr Pullman be excused. Now, our agenda for tomorrow We're moving to the other mine regulator, the Victorian Work Cover Authority, tomorrow. We will have evidence in the morning from Inspector Kevin Hayes, who is a local inspector and has had a number of interactions with the Hazelwood mine, and Mr Len Neast, who is the Executive Director of Health and Safety at the Victorian Work Cover Authority. Robert Jackman will be giving evidence as a community witness, and then we'll return to Latrobe City Council and hear from Lance King, who is the Coordinator of Emergency Management there.